The stone won't fall until the podcast of the dragon comes to your device. Hey everybody, my name is Morgan. You might know me as the Grey Warder on Twitter and Discord. Welcome to the 15th episode of Podcast of the Dragon. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope things are going well. Today, in my second episode about Nynaeve, I'm going to skip back and forth a bit between the Great Hunt and the Eye of the World as I examine scenes where she struggles, break down her motivations, and delve into some really shining moments where she engages in major acts of badassery. When Robert Jordan set out to write The Wheel of Time, he wanted to write something that would be realistic, a fantasy story that had logical consequences, where whatever event or series of events happened, the things that followed after would be reasonable and make sense. A fantasy world that existed in a place where if certain things, whatever those things might be, occurred in the past, they would lead to X actions, engender Y type of culture, and produce Z people at this time. While he wanted his main characters to come from a place that was innocent and peaceful, their place of origin couldn't be utopian, not and be a realistic place. So instead, he gave us somewhere rustic and idyllic, where the people are really ignorant about the world and have not known much in the way of evil. When it comes to thinking the worst of people, for the Two Rivers people, they think that people are untrustworthy. They are never fearful of being killed or feel like they're in real danger from others. They just don't think people are capable of truly bad things. But RJ keeps stuff grounded. We know that life can be very hard for Two Rivers people. They face food shortages and existential threats from animals. Their lives are not utterly without fear. And while the people aren't combative and they don't think anything truly ill of one another, they are too stubborn to be a model of cooperation. There is at least minor conflict among them. But nonetheless, kindness and decency are expected out of people, and there is mutual respect, even as the people butt heads. You can expect support from your neighbors. If you need help, people will help you, even if you were arguing with them 2 or 3 days ago. And the impression that is also given is that most families are pretty happy. And while there may be this, like the matriarch and the patriarch struggle for control, this is women's circle business, and you go to the village council for that, there also seems to be this expectation of general decency in the family, and it is held in by strong strictures and enforced with general gossip and strong cultural mores. Bad behavior is not tolerated, which is probably one of the reasons why the Coplans and the Congers are so stigmatized. And maybe it's only glossy on the surface. Maybe terrible stuff happens among the Coplans and the Congers. We know that there's alcoholism, that is discussed, but maybe there's also child abuse and terrible things like that. Things that nobody in the Two Rivers wants to believe could really happen, and so they don't actually acknowledge it. But for the most part, it seems like everybody is in everybody's business so much among the Two Rivers people that there's just this standard of behavior where the worst that you could say of a Copland and a Conger is that they're a drunk and, a whiny wanker and lazy. And so the general trust and consensus of decency among the people and mistrust of outsiders shows that they have a fundamental faith in each other. So with the Emmons Field 5, we get 5 very different people who come with fundamentally similar values. Perrin is the sweet and practical one who can't bear to hurt people. Matt is the thoughtless, impulsive one who means really well but fucks everything up. Ran is the melancholy one with daddy issues whose internal fuckery we're privy to because most of the first 2 books are from his point of view. Egwene is the crazy smart one with the very complicated personality. RJ had to write her with a complicated personality because she was destined to be RJ had to write her with a complicated personality because she was destined to be the Amerlin and of all Ajas and none, and so she had to have components of all of those and just be more multifaceted than the other characters. And we have Nynaeve, who is fierce and anxious, protective and wounded, and determined to control the situation, whatever that situation is, no matter how small, and really struggles internally when she can't. For a Two Rivers person, Nynaeve has had a hard life. She's had the early loss of someone very important to her in her father. We don't know exactly when he died, but we can presume that she was likely into early adolescence. The level of skill he imparted upon her as far as woodcraft and tracking is not something that a young child could attain, so I would presume that she had to have been at least 11 or 12 when he died. So she had the loss of a parent that she was very attached to. And when you're an only child, you're already closer to your parents than people with siblings tend to be. I mean, psychological studies bear that out. That's just inevitable when you don't have to share the attention. And if you have one parent that you very much prefer over the other, and then that's the one that dies, that's very, very difficult. I'm an only child, and I was much closer to my mother than I am to my father, and my mother was the one that died. But I was 26 when she died, so I can't imagine what it would have been like, especially with the struggles that I had with my father growing up, to have lost my mother at a young age when I was so close with her. So imagining how Nynaeve must have felt, that's awful. So she loses the parent that she has a very special relationship with, and her relationship with the other parent is problematic. That's the subtext from what we read in the Wheel of Time companion about Elnor Almira and how she's a difficult person to live with, especially as a mother. Robert Jordan does a great job of creating this person in Nynaeve, who is someone that you can take at face value, but the deeper that you dig, the more layered she is. And I can imagine him getting into her head to write her, knowing that she's desperate to heal and asking himself, why is she so desperate to heal? What happened that would make her so desperate? Where her fear for Egwene would make her so terrified that it would cause her to draw on the one power. Like the loss of her father, what realistic consequences come from someone who has lost a parent that early, a parent that they're close to? Mightn't she have anxieties? Mightn't she feel insecure? What might play into that and make it worse? Maybe her mother was hypercritical. Like, nothing ever states that Elnor Almira was hypercritical, but I'm imagining her as that, just taking from the little bit that we get in the Wheel of Time companion. And going from that and wondering, why is Nynaeve so defensive about her authority? Is it not just that she's young and people patronize her, or is it that her mother told her that she wasn't good enough her whole life? What little things about her make her up? All of these little things that most people reading this series aren't going to pick up or notice, but a person on many rereads who might want to take the time to contemplate her character will think about and be like, oh shit, and then think, damn, Jordan, because she is such a deep character. And it's just really impressive how much he gets into her head in a way that is not expressed with words, because she is not a self reflective person and not a self aware person. And just the subtleties of her emotions and the little sketch that we get of her background from what she tells us in The Eye of the World, the few details we can glean from Ravens if you read the alternative prologue, and the bits in the Wheel of Time companion, and then what you can surmise from all of that with just a little bit of imagination. Last episode, I suggested that Nynaeve might not have the temperament to be the wisdom because she isn't good with people. And maybe that was unfair. She has tons of compassion. You can see it in her inner narrative as she examines Moraine, as she's dealing with the citizens of Whitebridge, when she, Nynaeve, and Lon ride into it. The town has been burned and it's in turmoil. A day or two before, Tom attacked the Fades so that Rand and Mat could get away, and chaos ensued. It says, in the next moment she was down off Aldebe and speaking to townsfolk. She did not ask questions. She gave sympathy, and to Nynaeve's surprise it appeared genuine. People who shied away from Lon, ready to hurry from any stranger, stopped to speak with Moraine. They appeared startled themselves at what they were doing, but they opened up after a fashion, under Moraine's clear gaze and soothing voice. The Aes Sedai's eyes seemed to share the people's hurt, to empathize with their confusion, and tongues loosened. So Nynaeve expects Moraine to be totally heartless and is surprised when she's not. And as you see her break down the way that Moraine deals with people, You see her knowing that Moraine understands how to handle people when they are hurting and when times are hard. And so her surprise in Moraine's capacity for care and the way that she marks it in her description gives a little view into how good Nynaeve is, not just at healing people's physical ailments, but at dealing with anyone who is troubled and hurting. At the beginning of the Great Hunt, Nynaeve is a person in crisis. She left the Two Rivers with a very specific goal and a time frame in which to achieve it, and circumstances didn't accommodate her. And because she takes her duty as wisdom so seriously, along with all of the other anxieties that she's struggling with, and at this point, not just anxieties, but trauma, there's likely been this alarm going off in her head the whole time, the longer and the farther that she's gone from home. And at the point that they're in the Great Hunt, and they've gotten to Faldara, and everything has gone down at the eye of the world, and she knows that she can channel, she's coming to see that she will not achieve the goal that she set out to. And so in her head is the swirling mix of struggling to accept reality, being furious with Moraine, likely still being in shock about Rand. Like, what a shocking thing to learn. RJ will show in her narratives in retrospect where people reflect on Rand being able to channel and acknowledge that it's difficult to think about or it's hard to imagine Rand being able to do that and how troubling it is, but never kind of articulating this stunning sensation of learning in the moment that someone you've known their whole life or you have known your whole life can do something that no one is supposed to be able to do, that only monstrous people can do, and just how appalling it is. That is never covered. Maybe because there's no way to describe that without over-describing it, no way to really break down how you would feel. It's too complicated an emotion. And so in writing that, the best way he could do it was only to have characters look back and describe how they were disturbed by it. But at the beginning of the Great Hunt, it has only been a month, and I would think that Nynaeve is still very much in shock about Rand. And so after the keep has been attacked and the horn has been stolen, and everybody's getting ready to split and go their separate ways, Rand, Mat, and Perrin are going to go with Ingtar and chase the Horn of Valir. Nynaeve and Egwene are going to leave with the Amerlin Seat's party and go to Tar Valon. We see this scene as Nynaeve sees Rand going through the women's apartments, having left the Amerlin's quarters. The Amerlin has told him he's the Dragon Reborn, and he's leaving. He's angry and emotional, and so there's just this sense of agitation following him. And she's trying to chase after him and catch up with him because she's upset and worried about what might have happened to him. And it says, she hurried away from the women's apartments, head swiveling at every crossing corridor to look for him, fists clenched. Light, what have they done to him? I should have gotten him away from Moraine somehow. The light blind her. I'm his wisdom. Are you? A small voice taunted. You've abandoned Emond's Field to fend for itself. Can you still call yourself their wisdom? I did not abandon them, she told herself fiercely. I brought Mavra Malin up from Devon Ride to look after matters till I get back. She can deal well enough with the mayor and the village council, and she gets on well with the women's circle. Mavra will have to go back to her own village. No village could do without its wisdom for long. Nynaeve cringed inside. She had been gone months from Emond's Field. I am the wisdom of Emond's Field, she said aloud. She feels like she is failing everyone. All of the other Emond's Fielders change and adapt to their circumstances, either by choice or through trauma, where they have no option but to do it. And Nynaeve changes very little. So much of her inner turmoil that she has is about how things shouldn't be, even though she knows that it's not logical to be agitated about those things. And so you get this kind of boiling snake pit where she is constantly at odds with herself. And one of the only things that she can control is her rage at Moraine, using that rage as a focusing point. And having gotten to the point of really contemplating that, I'm no longer so hard on her about the fact that her anger toward Moraine is illogical. I think that Nynaeve knows from the beginning that it doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's like the only thing that she can control in this whole situation. She can't control the Trollocs. She can't control that the Dark One's after the boys. She can't control Rand's channeling. All she can control is that Moraine, who is a woman that she does not like and who happens to coincidentally have come along at the same time as all of this other shitstorm of things that are happening, and who therefore could possibly be blamed for them, even though it doesn't take Nynaeve long to understand deep down that that is not a reasonable thing. Moraine can be an object of her hate and her anger because she doesn't like her. And so she focuses her hate on Moraine and her desire for vengeance just because that's something that she can control. And being somewhat of a control freak myself, I understand wanting something to control. And having never in my life been in such a crazy place where things are so out of control to the point of such apocalyptic proportions, I'm not going to judge and say that her needing to have that focus to keep her anxiety at bay, to keep from being completely brought under, is absurd. I have anxiety, and I know what it's like to get overwhelmed and have a meltdown, have a panic attack, and if focusing on rage and anger is how she controls that, I mean, at least she can control it. Whatever herbs she has, there's no Ativan in Randland. Nynaeve has a deep dislike for Moraine, and I think partly it's that she's envious of her. And I don't mean that she's envious because of Lon exactly. However much she might hate that Lon is bonded to Moraine, she knows that the bond is not the reason that he rejected her. She's envious of the qualities Moraine possesses. When Moraine first tells Nynaeve that she can channel, we get, "Do you remember how I suddenly asked you if you were the wisdom? Why, do you think? There was nothing to distinguish you from any other pretty young woman getting ready for festival. Even looking for a young wisdom, I expected someone half again your age." Nynaeve remembered that meeting all too well. This woman, more self-possessed than anyone in the women's circle, in a dress more beautiful than any she had ever seen, addressing her as a child. And while Nynaeve, Moraine, and Lon are traveling together after Shatterlogoth looking for the kids, Moraine says, in response to Nynaeve peppering her with questions and getting really frustrated with her, "Part of the training you will receive in Tar Valon wisdom will teach you to control your temper. You can do nothing with the one power when emotion rules your mind." Nynaeve opened her mouth, but the Aes Sedai went right on. "Lon, I must speak with you a moment." The two put their heads together, and Nynaeve was left with a sullen glower that she hated every time she realized it was on her face. It came too often as the Aes Sedai deftly turned her questions off onto another subject, slid easily by her conversational traps, or ignored her shouts until they ended in silence. The scowl made her feel like a girl who had been caught acting the fool by someone in the women's circle. That was a feeling Nynaeve was not used to. In New Spring, Moraine talks about her own temper and how her training in the White Tower had taught her to control it, that it was one of the first things she really learned to do. I think that she sees a lot of herself in Nynaeve, and the reason that she needles Nynaeve is not to be cruel, but just to keep her off balance because she wants Nynaeve to come to the tower. She's like, "This woman has really good potential. She could be a really good Aes Sedai." And I would have left her be in the Two Rivers because I didn't have time to try to get a Wilder to come to the tower. But if she's here and she's tagging along and she is this easy to manipulate with just a little bit of reverse psychology, if she can learn to control her temper a little bit, she has everything that she needs to be great. If she can get to that point where she can be dignified and have self-possession and self-control. I really think there's a lot about Nynaeve that Moraine identifies with. Returning to the start of the Great Hunt, with Nynaeve, after she's gone looking for Rand and has her little outburst about how she's the wisdom of Emond's Field, she can't find Rand, but she comes across Lon, who's looking out a window. And it says, "What would a king want with a village woman? He's a warder, too, bonded to Moraine. She has his loyalty to the death that ties closer than any lover, and she has him. She has everything I want, the light burn her." It's not just that Moraine has Lon. She has everything Nynaeve wants. But what else does Moraine possess that Nynaeve wants? She wants calm. She wants poise. She wants self-possession. She wants to be listened to and taken seriously without having to fight about it. She wants that change that you get in your brain that makes you feel totally grown, that happens in your mid to late 20s, that full maturation of your prefrontal cortex. She wants to stop being so anxious. She wants to rule her feelings. and she wants to successfully protect the kids. Moraine has all of those things, including the power to protect, but that protection comes at an unknown price that Nynaeve mistrusts. So after talking to Lon, Nynaeve runs into Moraine. Lon has given her his ring. They have a sad little interlude after he sees her looking at him as he's at the window, and he gives her his ring and calls her Mashiara, his lost love, and takes off. It says, "What have you done to Rand? He was taken to the Amerlin. Why? Did you tell her about... She could not say it. He was from her own village, and she was just enough older than he to have looked after him a time or two when he was little, but she could not even think about what he had become without her stomach twisting. The Amerlin will be seeing all three, Nynaeve. Taviran are not so common that she would miss the chance to see three together in one place. Perhaps she will give them a few words of encouragement since they are riding with Ingtar to hunt those who stole the horn. They will be leaving about the time we do, so you had better hurry with any farewells." Nynaeve dashed to the nearest arrow slit and peered down at the outer courtyard. Horses were everywhere, pack animals and saddle horses, and men hurrying about them, calling to each other. The only clear space was where the Amerlin's palanquin stood, its paired horses waiting patiently without any attendants. Some of the warders were out there, looking over their mounts, and on the other side of the courtyard Ingtar stood with a knot of Shinerans around him in armor. Sometimes a warder or one of Ingtar's men crossed the paving stones to exchange a word. "I should have gotten the boys away from you," she said, still looking out. "Egwene, too, if I could have done it without killing her. Light, why did she have to be born with this cursed ability? I should have taken them back home." "They are more than old enough to be off apron strings," Moraine said dryly, "and you know very well why you could never do that, for one of them at least. Besides, it would mean leaving Egwene to go to Tar Valon alone, or if you decided to forego Tar Valon yourself. If your own use of the power is not schooled, you will never be able to use it against me." Nynaeve spun to face the Aes Sedai, her jaw dropping. She could not help it. "I don't know what you were talking about." "Did you think I did not know, child? Well, as you wish it. I take it that you are coming to Tar Valon." "Yes, I thought so." Nynaeve wanted to hit her, to knock away the brief smile that flashed across the Aes Sedai's face. Aes Sedai had not been able to wield power openly since the breaking, much less the one power, but they plotted and manipulated, pulled strings like puppet masters, used thrones and nations like stones on a stone's board. She wants to use me too somehow. If a king or a queen, why not a wisdom? Just the way she's using Rand. I'm no child, Aes Sedai. What are you doing with Rand now? Have you not used him enough? I don't know why you have not had him gentled now the Amerlin's here with all those other Aes Sedai, but you must have a reason. It must be some plot you're hatching. If the Amerlin knew what you were up to, I wager she'd... Moraine cut her off. What possible interest could the Amerlin have in a shepherd? Of course, if he were brought to her attention in the wrong way, he might be gentled or even killed. He is what he is, after all. And there is considerable anger about last night. Everyone is looking for whom to blame. The Aes Sedai fell silent and let the silence stretch. Nynaeve stared at her, grinding her teeth. "Yes," Moraine said finally, "much better to let a sleeping lion sleep. Best you see to your packing now." She moved off in the direction Lon had gone, seeming to glide across the floor. Grimacing, Nynaeve swung her fist back against the wall. The ring dug at her palm. She opened her hand to look at it. The ring seemed to heat her anger, focus her hate. "I will learn. You think because you know you can escape me, but I will learn better than you think, and I will pull you down for what you've done to Mat and to Perrin. For Rand, the light help him and the Creator shelter him, especially for Rand." Her hand closed around the heavy circlet of gold. "And for me." And interesting, but nice also, that she grants Egwene her agency and doesn't feel any need to get vengeance for that because she knows that Egwene is going to do what she wants. But here Moraine can glide off, now feeling very content that she's motivated Nynaeve, and Nynaeve is not going to change her mind at this point, that she will definitely go to Tar Valon because, whatever it takes, pride, spite, whatever is necessary to get her to the tower, because she knows that Nynaeve's got a good mind and that she will eventually grow out of her need for vengeance, hopefully. But regardless, Moraine will manipulate her to ensure that she goes to Tar Valon because the tower needs more Aes Sedai. And Nynaeve does not want to be Aes Sedai, But she does want justice and vengeance, and when she can let that go, she also sees possibilities. Going back to the Eye of the World, to where Lon, Moraine, and Nynaeve are still searching for the boys, Moraine has told Nynaeve what she's been doing, that she's been channeling, and Nynaeve has been left in this internal crisis. She's riding with Lon and Moraine, and she's trying to fight with Moraine, but Moraine won't engage, and Lon is watching their not a sparring match, and she's just in this really uncomfortable position. She's been mentally berating herself for using the power. She's just like using it like a dirty, dark friend Aes Sedai, but she's had a few days to get used to it. And it says here, sometimes, against her will, Nynaeve had found herself thinking of what a wisdom could do with the one power, of what she could do. Whenever she realized what was in her head, though, a flash of anger burned it out. The power was a filthy thing. She would have nothing to do with it, unless she had to. And I just look at this picture of Nynaeve feeling furious and tainted by this unwelcome news, but it doesn't take her very long to mostly work through it. By the time you get to the Great Hunt, she's had time to imagine, to do a bit of daydreaming, and she's gotten to the point where she's decided that she will go to Tar Valon. She's gotten past shuddering and thinking, no, the one power is a filthy thing, I'll have nothing to do with it, to being like, yeah, I could use it. What could a wisdom do with it? I healed Egwene. I know that there have been times when the healing is going to work really well. I've used it on other people, and it's miraculous. What if I can miraculously heal people all of the time? Think of what I could do. And I imagine, just to keep hopping back on my White Tower as the Naval Academy analogy, to have a modern day metaphor, thinking of Nynaeve, picturing her as a person who really wants to be a doctor, and imagining someone who is deeply suspicious of authority, not pro-government or pro-military, and with no interest in following other people's rules or being part of their organization. But the right set of circumstances come together, and a path is open to the training that the person needs to do the thing that they love, the thing that they were born to do, because they were born to be a doctor. And the only way to get that goal is to put on a uniform and become part of an institution that they despise, an institution whose morals they question, whose leaders they find suspect, and whose intentions they feel are dubious. But they want something that that institution can give them. And so they pledge themselves, and they put on the uniform, and they work for the commission, but only as a means to an end. Because going to school and being a doctor in the United States of America is an expensive endeavor, and you graduate from medical school with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt. And if you get free college, if you go to the Naval Academy and you get free college, and then you get free medical school, and the price that you pay for that is a few years where the government owns you and you have to be a Navy doctor, to have that, to not be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, for some people, that is a price worth paying. And, a person might not even have chosen to do that, this person in this metaphor, except that, let's say they feel they've been slighted or wronged by someone, and the only way that they can get justice or vengeance is to attain some manner of power or status within this system. And their anxiety and their rage is such that being goal-oriented, even if the goal is getting back at someone, keeps them from falling apart. And that is what I can see in Nynaeve. And we do see that. Yeah, she wants to pull Moraine down, but that's almost like a way to deal with her anxiety. And far below that, she wants to learn to make the best use of these talents because she wants to be a doctor and she wants to have the best training. And if that means that she has to join this bullshit system, she'll do it to get what she wants out of it. But she won't do it without having a bad taste in her mouth. The Hippocratic Oath says to first do no harm. And while there's no Hippocratic Oath in the Wheel of Time exactly, it is the stated sworn goal of all Aes Sedai to at least do no harm with the one power, and to not make weapons for other people to be able to harm each other. In the series, it talks about girls who have their early tricks, girls who begin to channel before they come to the tower, and how it tends to be either compulsion light or eavesdropping. Skills that are fueled by desires, the desire to have and the desire to know. I assume that wilders who survive must have a wider array of skills. I mean, obviously, Nynaeve can listen to the wind and she can heal, And I'm assuming that there are other wilders that have other kinds of abilities, but we don't often hear about wilders or girls with the spark that manifest early, whose powers manifest as combat magic. And I would think that there have to be cases because early channeling is pushed by emotion, like cases of extreme fear or existential danger, strong desire, things where actual fighting is the only hope. Those no doubt occasionally will end up with the person or the threat being barbecued, and maybe people who do that tend to be women who don't survive because even if you survive the sickness that kills 3 out of 4 people, you could still presumably destroy yourself unconsciously channeling. You could still destroy yourself just the way any Aes Sedai who has been trained can destroy themselves. And even if you don't destroy yourself by drawing too much, I'm assuming that you could barbecue yourself accidentally. Our knowledge of Nynaeve's early channeling is that she heals people and that she can listen to the wind. In later books, other Aes Sedai like Cadswain marvel at how talented she is at healing. Like, her healing is off the hook. But they also comment that she's really shitty at basically anything else. And it's one of the reasons that they dismiss her legitimacy. They're like, she spent almost no time in the tower. Yeah, she's great at healing, but she can't do this, she can't do this, she can't do that. And so why would we call her an Aes Sedai? She needs to get back in the tower and learn everything else. What's the point of only being able to heal? And she even admits to Elaine when Elaine is pointing out stuff she should have known and is sort of like, we learned all of this stuff. The history, the social studies, the things that don't have to do with the power, because your education in the tower is so much more than just things to do with the one power. And Elaine's like, yo, we learned this. Nynaeve admits that she basically doesn't pay attention to anything except the yellows. Like, she went to the yellows, she learned about healing, and as an accepted, she got to choose her own studies, so that's what she chose to do. Other than that, she basically does not make an active effort to learn anything else while she's in Tar Valon, which is honestly a shame because you couldn't have a better education available to you anywhere. But when it comes to the one power, Nynaeve can do many weaves, whether or not they have to do with healing, without thought and on instinct. And Robert Jordan gives her really strong innate talent and quick learning and the ability to remember. She remembers what she sees. And Jordan makes sure we know early on into her training that her memory when it comes to weaves is excellent. So he shows us a notable scene where she gets a lesson from Swan on the riverboat as they're heading to Tar Valon. Swan gets her all riled up, and then they're using air to hold each other, and she manages to slam Swan back against the wall, and Swan says, they were right, you do remember everything that you're shown. And we see that all the way into the Gathering Storm, when Daigian is showing her all of the different weaves that you make to be able to pass the test for Aes Sedai. Like, the other Aes Sedai are trying to keep her occupied and maybe give her some matter of legitimacy. Like, at least you can learn these weaves so that we can test you should we ever get you to the tower. To the point where when she does get called to the tower, and the sitters are like, you know what? We should test her. And Egwene is like, wait, what? Yo. And Nynaeve is like, I know all the weaves. Yeah, I can do this. She doesn't have much time to learn that kind of stuff, but she sees and she remembers, which is an incredible talent. I would be a very slow learner in the tower because I would struggle. I like to tie knots for fun, and not even for kinky reasons, just because I'm a nerd. And I struggle all the time to remember how to tie knots and which way they go because it's just not something that my mind retains. And so I have to go back and look at my little knot tying card and be like, is this how you tie this little hitch? And I've gotten to the point where I remember a handful of them, but it's difficult for me. And so for someone who would pick that up on the first try, that is an impressive talent that RJ gives her. We don't get much of Nynaeve's point of view in The Eye of the World, but he does use her because it's useful to check on the progress of her, Lon, and Moraine. And because she's a significant character with an important journey, even if she doesn't have much page time, he needs us to be able to see her and to know some stuff about her. And in many ways, interestingly enough, her post-Shatter Logoth trip is kind of the most difficult of any of the Emmons Fielders. She's the safest of them all, but being with Moraine and Lon leaves her feeling small and stupid and powerless. And so you're getting POVs from Rand and Perrin where they're making decisions and fighting their way out of situations and gaining greater agency, kind of growing into their powers. And you have Nynaeve just struggling and frustrated and angry. And Robert Jordan has an obvious strong love for her, and he doesn't want to leave her just floundering in frustration and impotence. And so we don't spend a great deal of time in her head, enough for world building and character development, and to move the part of the story that is her, Lon, and Moraine along. He wants us to see Nynaeve lost and struggling with her identity, but he doesn't want to leave us there with her, because Nynaeve is best when she is a force to be reckoned with. He doesn't want us to see much of a sad, lost, frustrated Nynaeve. He wants to give us a little of it so that we can see something real with her struggles, and then he gives her something to fight, because even in book 1, he wants us to know what a resourceful badass that she is. And so we get to where Nynaeve, Moraine, and Lon track Perrin to the White Cloak camp, and you get this great kind of flashback flash forward with Nynaeve waiting, holding the horses. Lon has gone scouting, and he comes back to tell her that there are white cloaks. The lad that we're after is in the middle of the camp. And it says, "How are you going to free him?" It was not until he glanced at her that she realized how much assurance there had been in her that he could march into the middle of 200 men and come back with the boy. Well, he is a warder. Some of the stories must be true. She wondered if he was laughing at her, but his voice was flat and businesslike. "I can bring him out, but he'll likely be in no shape for stealth. If we're seen, we may find 200 white cloaks on our heels and us riding double, unless they are too busy to chase us. Are you willing to take a chance?" "To help an Emmons Fielder, of course. What kind of chance?" He pointed into the darkness again, beyond the tents. This time she could make out nothing but shadows. "They're horse lines. If the picket ropes are cut, not all the way through, but enough so they'll break when Moraine creates a diversion, the white cloaks will be too busy chasing their own horses to come after us. There are 2 guards on that side of the camp, beyond the picket lines, but if you are half as good as I think you are, they'll never see you." She swallowed hard. Stalking rabbits was one thing. Guards, though, with spears and swords. "So he thinks I'm good, does he? I'll do it." Lon nodded again as if he had expected no less. This is our first glimpse of Nynaeve's unhesitating courage. She does not blink. She goes straight to go and cut the horse lines. She's all mission impossible. And it's so nice because being inside the head of angry, frustrated Nynaeve makes you angry and frustrated with her, because it's just sort of like, I don't know, it's not fun to hang around in the mind of an anxious and frustrated person. I don't like to feel anxious and frustrated. Why would I want to sit in the mind of someone who is anxious and frustrated and ill-equipped to deal with it, when I can't even calm that person down or help order and arrange that person's thoughts in a way to help them think their way out of it? At least when I'm anxious and frustrated, I can work with that shit. But with her, all you can do is just sit there in the quagmire, the anxiety and miserable frustration that is Nynaeve when she can't do anything to fix her problem. So having her have a problem that she can work on, whether it's somebody to heal or somebody to rescue, somebody to track or a trap to walk into, a Forsaken to fight, Nynaeve with agency, Nynaeve with danger to get into, Nynaeve with courage to show. That is Nynaeve when it's really fun to get into her head. So here she goes, all Mission Impossible. It says, Nynaeve waited, counting to herself while they made their circuit twice. Each time they took exactly the same count, and each time they rigidly repeated the same formula, not a word more or less. Neither so much as glanced to one side. They stared straight ahead as they marched up, then marched away. She wondered if they would have noticed her, even if she had been standing up. Before the night swallowed the pale swirl of their cloaks a third time, she was already on her feet, running in a crouch toward the horses. As she came close, she slowed so as not to startle the animals. The white cloak guards might not see what was not shoved under their noses, but they would certainly investigate if the horses suddenly began whickering. The horses along the picket lines, there was more than one row, were barely realized masses in the darkness, heads down. Occasionally one snorted or stamped a foot in its sleep. In the dim moonlight, she was nearly on the end post of the picket line before she saw it. She reached for the picket line and froze when the nearest horse raised its head and looked at her. Its single lead rein was tied in a big loop around the thumb-thick line that ended at the post. One whinny. Her heart tried to pound its way out of her chest, sounding loud enough to bring the guards. Never taking her eyes off the horse, she sliced at the picket rope, feeling in front of her blade to see how far she had cut. The horse tossed its head, and her breath went cold. Just one whinny. Only a few thin strands of hemp remained whole under her fingers. Slowly she headed toward the next line, watching the horse until she could no longer see if it was looking up or not, then drew a ragged breath. If they were all like that, she did not think she would last. At the next picket rope, though, and the next, the horses remained asleep, even when she cut her thumb and bit off a yelp. Sucking the cut, she looked warily back the way she had come. Upwind as she was, she could no longer hear the guards make their exchange, but they might have heard her if they were in the right place. If they were coming to see what the noise had been, the wind would keep her from hearing them until they were right on top of her. Time to go. With 4 horses out of 5 running loose, they won't be chasing anyone. But she did not move. She could imagine Lon's eyes when he heard what she had done. There would be no accusation in them. Her reasoning was sound, and he would not expect any more of her. She was a wisdom, not a bloody great invincible warder who could make himself all but invisible. Jaw set, she moved to the last picket line. The first horse on it was Bella. There was no mistaking that squat, shaggy shape. For there to be another horse like that here and now was too big a coincidence. Suddenly she was so glad that she had not left off this last line that she was shaking. Her arms and legs trembled so that she was afraid to touch the picket rope, but her mind was as clear as the wine spring water. Whichever of the boys was in the camp, Egwene was there too, and if they left riding double, some of the children would catch them no matter how well the horses were scattered, and some of them would die. She was as certain as if she were listening to the wind. That stuck a spike of fear into her belly, fear of how she was certain. This had nothing to do with weather or crops or sickness. Why did Moraine tell me I could use the power? Why couldn't she leave me alone? Strangely, the fear stilled her trembling. With hands as steady as if she were grinding herbs in her own house, she slit the picket rope as she had the others. Thrusting the dagger back into its sheath, she untied Bella's lead rein. The shaggy mare woke with a start, tossing her head, but Nynaeve stroked her nose and spoke comforting words softly in her ear. Bella gave a low snort and seemed content. Other horses along that line were awake too and looking at her. Remembering Mandarb, she reached hesitantly to the next lead rein, but that horse gave no objection to a strange hand. Indeed, it seemed to want some of the muzzle stroking that Bella had received. She gripped Bella's rein tightly and wrapped the other around her other wrist, all the while watching the camp nervously. The pale tents were only 30 yards off, and she could see men moving among them. If they noticed the horses stirring and came to see what caused it, desperately she wished for Moraine not to wait on her return. Whatever the Aes Sedai was going to do, let her do it now. Light, make her do it now, before... Abruptly lightning shattered the night overhead, for a moment obliterating the darkness. So, I wonder, did Nynaeve do the first lightning? The other lightning bolts follow one right after the other, so it could very well be that she did not. But I wonder, because she's thinking to herself, do it now, do it now, do it now. In her hope and desperation, did she unconsciously call the first bolt? At the end of the Great Hunt, once Liandrin betrays them to the Seanchan, Nynaeve uses an array of destructive channeling. Because we only know her as the wilder healer, Robert Jordan does this really good job throughout the Great Hunt of showing us everything that she ends up using in a destructive fashion at the end of the book. So we see her using fire first in the lesson that she has with Varen while she and Egwene are traveling with the Aes Sedai to the river before they take ship to Tar Valon. It says, Nynaeve wore a face like weak old death, her eyes clamped shut as if she never meant to open them, and her hands white-knuckled fists in her lap. Egwene hoped the wisdom's temper did not break loose, not after she had held it this long. Feel the flow through you, Varen was saying. Her voice did not change, but suddenly there was a gleam in her eyes. Feel the flow of the power. Flow like a breeze, a gentle stirring in the air. Egwene sat up straight. This was how Varen had guided her each time she had actually had the power flowing through her. A soft breeze, the slightest movement of air. Soft. Abruptly the stacked blankets burst into flame like fat wood. Nynaeve opened her eyes with a yell. Egwene was not sure if she screamed or not. All Egwene knew was that she was on her feet, trying to kick the burning blankets outside before they set the tent on fire. Before she managed a second kick, the flames vanished, leaving wispy smoke rising from a charred mass and the smell of burned wool. "Well," Baron said, "well, I did not expect to have to douse a fire. Don't faint on me, child. It's all right now. I took care of it. I I was angry." Nynaeve spoke through trembling lips and a bloodless face. "I heard you talking about a breeze, telling me what to do, and fire just popped into my head. I didn't mean to burn anything. It was just a small fire. In my head." She shuddered. Nynaeve might not be responsible for the first lightning strike at the White Cloak camp, but she does channel lightning in her acceptance test, even though she's not supposed to be able to remember how to channel it all. She channels it against Agenor when he's being a gross creeper and chasing her through the maze in her way back for what was. It says, "Lightning fell with her glare, striking around him, stone exploding ever closer and closer. She could feel him fighting to push it back at her, but foot by foot the dazzling bolts moved toward the Forsaken." In this fight with Agenor, she also throws fireballs at him, she does earthquakes, she blows him down the maze with wind. We see a tidy arsenal of combat spells, weaves that she will remember how to make. And then RJ gives us one last little bit right before Liandrin comes into Egwene's room and kicks Elaine and Min out before proceeding to lay out the bait to trap them. Nynaeve is pacing about. Elaine has just come in with the news that Galdrine is dead, and she looks at her and she's like, "What's wrong with her?" It says, "I wouldn't bother her." Min leaned toward the two of them and lowered her voice. "That skinny accepted Irella told her she was as clumsy as a cow and had half the talents, and Nynaeve clouded her ear." Elaine winced. "Exactly," Min murmured. "They had her up to Shiriam's study before you could blink, and she hasn't been fit to live with since." Apparently Min had not dropped her voice enough, for there was a growl from Nynaeve. Suddenly the door whipped open once more, and a gale howled into the room. It did not ruffle the blankets on Egwene's bed, but Min and the stool toppled to roll against the wall. Immediately the wind died, and Nynaeve stood with a stricken look on her face. So that's the last channeling we see from Nynaeve before Tome and Head, which is appropriate because a day or so later they step out from the Waygate, and the massive blowing of the wind strong enough to blow someone off a stool and topple them across the room, is what Dr. Almira reaches for. It says, "The hook-nosed man suddenly seized Min and Elaine by the scruffs of their necks, and in the next instant everything seemed to happen at once. The man yelled a curse, and a woman screamed, or perhaps more than one woman. Egwene could not be sure. Abruptly the breeze was a gale that whipped away Liandrin's angry shout in clouds of dirt and leaves and made the trees bend and groan." So Nynaeve's hair-trigger rage creates the confusion that, combined with Min cutting High Lady Suroth's soldier Elbar's hand, lets Nynaeve and Elaine get free, and so they're able to run away while Min and Egwene get captured. And it's really great writing on RJ's part, watching him just set all of that stuff up. Little bits here, little bits there, so that you wouldn't wonder, oh, how is it that Nynaeve is suddenly doing all this combat magic? It's like, no, he shows you already. He showed you that she accidentally started a fire in the tent because she was angry. Then he shows you that she remembers anything that she does. She has a combative lesson on the ship with the Amerlin, and Swan says, "Wow, they were right. You remember everything that you see." And then he makes it a point to have her actually channeling during one section of her acceptance test and unleashing all manner of combat magic. And she tells Shiriam, "I channeled the one power. It was so easy." And while her ease of channeling, or at least her ease of attaining the one power, is not the same outside the testing ter'angreal, she remembers how to do the flows. And then in a burst of anger, she blows Min off her stool with a targeted wind, so targeted that it doesn't ruffle the bed sheets. So RJ shows us all of these little bits of Nynaeve the healer, Nynaeve first do no harm, doing a little bit of combat magic throughout the books, so that it is perfectly understandable and perfectly believable that she would be able to do the type of channeling needed to get them away from the Shanshan, or at least to enable her own escape from the Shanshan, and to create enough confusion that Elaine was able to run away once Min cut the hand that was holding her. And that whole scene with the windstorm and them being able to get away is from Egwene's point of view. And then you get the horrible bit where she's captured, which is always the hardest part for me. I don't like that section because I'm not big into her being tortured and what is basically Egwene's version of being in the box. At least when Rand is in the box, he's just being beaten, and it's horrible when Rand is in the box, but it's not this psychological torture of being trained. It's really terrible. But it switches from Egwene's horrible point of view of being stroked like a dog by Rena to Nynaeve leaned out of her saddle to peer around the screen of prickly-leafed shrubs. Scattered trees met her eyes, some with leaves turning color. The expanses of grass and brush between seemed empty. Nothing moved that she could see except the thinning column of smoke wavering in a breeze from the leatherleaf. That had been her work, the leatherleaf, and once the lightning called from a clear sky, and a few other things she had not thought to try until those two women tried them on her. She thought they must work together in some way, though she could not understand their relation to each other, apparently leashed as they were. One wore a collar, but the other was chained as surely as she. What Nynaeve was sure of was that one or both were Aes Sedai. She had never had a clear enough sight of them to see the glow of channeling, but it had to be. I'll certainly take pleasure in telling Shiriam about them, she thought dryly. Aes Sedai don't use the power as a weapon, do they? She certainly had. She had at least knocked the two women down with that lightning strike, and she had seen one of the soldiers, or his body rather, burn from the ball of fire she made and hurled at them. And I find this really interesting. Perrin is the first Emmetsfielder to kill a human, the two White Cloaks that he kills. Nynaeve is the second Emmetsfielder to kill a human. She barbecues 3 Shanchan, and we know it's 3 because when the soldiers get called back by Elbar's horn, Egwene sees 3 horses with bodies across them. And Nynaeve does not have the same crisis of conscience that Perrin has. And I don't know if it's because she killed from a distance or because she is capable of hate, and Perrin just really isn't the type of person who's capable of hate. And so the rage and the hate that Nynaeve felt that was powering her makes her just not so troubled by what she did. Or just because she's practical. She was fleeing for her life, and so she killed them, and that's just how it is. Or all of the above. I don't know. But she does not weep tears for the people that she hurt in fighting to get free in the way that Perrin beats himself up for it. And it's just an interesting view in that the healer is not troubled so much by the people that she kills. And it's kind of neat, too, because it's like she's grown some. She feels like she's there to protect the kids, and that's her job. But you don't hear in her internal narrative, she is not punishing herself for Egwene being taken. And she's not even really kicking herself for trusting Liandrin. She's enraged at the betrayal. And for her, it's more proof that Aes Sedai aren't to be trusted, but she isn't doing the coulda, shoulda, woulda. So many people who love Nynaeve fall in love with her here, once they get to Tome and Head, where Robert Jordan puts her out in the world and gives her agency, and gives her use of the one power and danger for her to throw herself into. Because it's Nynaeve capable of doing things. Nynaeve capable of affecting the world. Nynaeve not feeling helpless. Nynaeve having things that she can do to combat her anxiety. That is a great Nynaeve. And then she has this perfect sidekick in Elaine. And however much people might hate Elaine, I mean, people have the right to feel however they feel about characters. And, I find all of the characters to have flaws, and every single character has flaws and things about them that annoy me. And so I don't know. I accept people as they are. And so I love Elaine, and it's one of the many things that I love about The Great Hunt, and particularly about the ending of it. It's the beginning of the building of the bromance between Nynaeve and Elaine, which really is one of my favorite relationships in the entirety of The Wheel of Time. You get this great scene showing the first bit of that building because, I imagine Nynaeve, not really thinking poorly of Elaine up until that point exactly, but not being particularly interested in her. I could see her seeing both Min and Elaine as being Egwene's friends, and her just kind of being the older person who doesn't really relate to these younger people because she doesn't have a lot in common with them. And it's sort of like they're the company that she keeps because she doesn't make any friends of her own among the other accepted. She doesn't trust them or like them. But she doesn't really feel like the people she chooses to spend time with are her friends because they're not her peers. And with Elaine, I could see her really not relating to Elaine at all. So, this moment where she and Elaine first come together and start to work together, and they work together so well. And I just love the two of them together. So, she and Elaine find each other and they come together. And Elaine is super upset that she ran away because she feels like that was cowardly. And that is not what is supposed to be the behavior of someone who is due to be the queen of Andor. She feels like she should have stood and fought. And the fact that she ran was cowardly and wrong. And Nynaeve is basically like, don't be a dumbass. If I had died trying to help them, Elaine began, you'd be dead, and little good you'd be then to yourself or them. Now get on your feet and brush off your dress. Nynaeve rummaged in her saddlebags for a hairbrush, and fix your hair. Elaine got up slowly and took the brush with a small laugh. You sound like Linny, my old nurse. She began to run the brush through her hair, wincing as tangles pulled. But how are we going to help them, Nynaeve? You may be as strong as a full sister when you were angry, but they have women who can channel too. I cannot think they are Aes Sedai, but they might as well be. We do not even know in which direction they took them. West, Nynaeve said. That creature Surith mentioned Falma, and that's as far west on Toman Head as you can go. We will go to Falma. I hope Liandrin is there. I will make her curse the day her mother laid eyes on her father. But first I think we had better find some clothes of the country. I've seen Tarabana and Domani women in the tower, and what they wear is nothing like what we have on. We would stand out in Falma as strangers. I would not mind a Domani dress, though Mother would surely have a fit if she ever found out I'd worn one, and Linny would never let me hear the end of it. But even if we find a village, can we afford new dresses? I have no idea how much money you have, but I have only 10 gold marks, and perhaps twice that in silver. That will keep us 2 or 3 weeks, but I don't know what we will do after that. A few months as a novice in Tarvalon, Nynaeve said, laughing, has not stopped you thinking like the heir to a throne. I don't have a tenth what you do, but altogether it will keep us 2 or 3 months in comfort. Longer if we are careful. I have no intention of buying us dresses, and they won't be new in any case. My gray silk dress will do us some good with all those pearls and that gold thread. If I can't find a woman who will trade us each 2 or 3 sturdy changes for that, I will give you this ring, and I will be the novice. She swung up into her saddle and reached a hand down to pull Elaine up behind her. What are we going to do when we reach Falma? Elaine asked as she settled on the mare's rump. I won't know that until we are there. Nynaeve paused, letting the horse stand. Are you sure you want to do this? It will be dangerous. More dangerous than it is for Egwene and Min. They would come after us if our circumstances were reversed. I know they would. Are we going to stay here all day? Elaine dug her heels in, and the mare started off. I love Elaine with Nynaeve because Elaine is not fazed by her temper. She respects her knowledge, she's glad to follow her lead, and she's always there with information to fill in when there's an educational or knowledge gap. She and Nynaeve are so great together. And I love not just their badassery, they complement each other's courage, often to the point of foolishness or insanity later. And I just love this bit when Elaine is distressed because she feels that she failed this test of courage when faced with her first real danger, and then Nynaeve immediately takes on the older sister role, just prepared to teach the naive princess. But she also admires Elaine and appreciates her courage. When she first runs into Elaine and Elaine creeps out from behind the bushes, she looks terrified, but Nynaeve notices that her dagger is held in a steady hand, like she's ready to cut somebody. One of the things that makes The Great Hunt so terrific is not only that it starts with a bang, but it ends with one. It ends with great tension and point of view switches. Once everybody gets to Falma and shit starts to go down, it really goes down. And while Rand's arc and getting the horn and getting the dagger is really tense and fun and exciting, I love them running through the streets and hopping over the wall, getting into Turak's house, getting the horn back, and Rand's fight with Turok and everything. Nynaeve, Min, and Elaine rescuing Egwene is the real nail-biter of it, I think. Just Nynaeve and Elaine being two unleashed channelers staying in Falma that whole time. The courage on their part to stay in that town, to scout, to find where Egwene is kept, to make the attempts to get the collars off. Nynaeve makes an attempt to get a collar off, and they have to hide for 3 days. And finally, when they make the second attempt, and they manage to get the collar off the one to Manny, and they capture Sita, and before Nynaeve actually makes the attempt, and they're checking to make sure that the coast is clear, her internal vow that she will sacrifice herself so that Min and Elaine can escape, and not let the Shanshan take her alive. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. It's great. It is by far the best part of the end of the book. Nynaeve combats her anxiety with action. She likes problems she can tackle head on. She will sacrifice herself for a goal if it means saving someone she cares about or taking her enemies with her, or both. And this last part of the Great Hunt, it's like Robert Jordan took Nynaeve and said, I've shown you who she is when she's powerless and frustrated. Now let me show you who she can be. And the person that she can be deserves her spot as one of the best loved Wheel of Time characters. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Podcast of the Dragon. I've honestly really enjoyed these 2 episodes that I did about Nynaeve. I wasn't super invested in them at first, but I felt it was very important because people identify with her, and I want to speak to my audience. And, when people identify with her, I don't want to be talking shit about someone and hurting people's feelings because I care about how people feel. And so my goal of building empathy for her was a goal that I achieved, and I will be a lot more patient with her going forth. And that's a good thing. I feel like I've, done something important for my own personal growth as well, and that's great. You can find me on Twitter at Warder Gray. That's Gray with an E. All of my links are down in the show notes. You want to check that out. You could rate and review me on iTunes. That would be great. If you could tell a friend about me, I'd really appreciate that. I'd like some more exposure. My music is by Kevin MacLeod. I'm the Grey Warder, and I don't have a braid to pull to start my lawnmower of rage so I can mow down my enemies, so I have to settle for unfollowing, unfriending, and ignoring them, which is more civilized and also kind of boring.